You're listening to Release Your Resistance with Bex Beltran, episode 60. Welcome to Release Your Resistance. This is Bex. The only reason why any of us don't have what we want in life is because of our own resistance. Right now, I'm learning how to recognize and release my resistance, and this podcast tells you how you can release your resistance so that you can live the exact life that you want. Let's get started. A few weeks ago, I told you how I was listening to the book The Surrender Experiment by Michael Singer. It's really been an interesting experience to watch my own resistance and then consideration and curiosity, and then openness to the concept of surrender. Along the way, I've been explaining what I've been thinking about to some of my friends and my coach. It really helped me to hear their questions and confusion about what I was thinking and what I was trying to put into words. And I wanted more of it too. More information, more content, more understanding. I told you how as soon as I was finished with the book, I went right back into my app and pressed start over to listen again. And when the book expired from the library and I was left without it to listen to anymore, a podcast episode and then another book with the same themes made their way into my ears. Today, in an effort to better understand through attempting to explain, I want to share what I've been hearing and learning, thinking about and noticing with you. And as always, I will be so curious to hear your reaction. First, let's talk about surrender. Is the idea of surrender just obvious and basic to you? Maybe you already live in surrender. Or is this concept completely foreign and crazy sounding? What is confusing, or what do you notice resistance to when you hear me talk about the concept of surrender? I've been working through my own questions and things I've noticed, and I've loved hearing questions and comments from other people as I talk it out. So for the rest of our time together today, I want to talk you through what I'm thinking at this point in time while knowing I am still learning and still realizing. The first thing to address about the concept of surrender and so many words that come up in this whole discussion is how many of them seem to come from the battleground. Surrender, resistance, liberation, struggle, fight, peace, freedom. Why is that? Is it necessary? And which came first, the comparison of these ideas to the battleground? Or do we actually use personal development language to describe what happens during war? Trippy, right? I haven't looked this up or researched it, but my guess is the reason we use these words like surrender and resistance and struggle and fight is because we are engaging, sometimes uncomfortably, with our own minds, our own egos. I'm not sure how I feel about this whole battle language situation just yet, but for now, I'm noticing that it does exist. It does provide descriptive words to use. I'm just accepting the language for now, and maybe as I continue learning, I will find non-war related vocabulary to use instead. And also, maybe it doesn't really matter. I had someone tell me that she wondered if surrender implied weakness. Isn't surrender just giving in? Yes, but maybe not in the way you're thinking. Surrender is accepting reality instead of fighting it. In this case, resistance really is futile. And since it's futile, resistance actually takes so much more effort and creates more strain than surrender. But that doesn't sound right, at least not to our minds. Our minds are probably screaming, no, don't accept, you must resist. You can control what's happening, or you should at least try to control what's happening. Spoiler alert, we can't control any of it. Sorry. As I continued my research into surrender and openness, I heard Tosha Silver answer the question of how do you define surrender as, it's the release of the my. When you surrender, the my, referring to the ego or the preference, is no longer the centerpiece to how you make decisions. Hearing that interview and that definition caused me to give Tosha's book, It's Not Your Money, a second consideration. I had judged a book by its cover. I saw that she had a book about money, and I thought, well, I don't have any resistance around money. That book isn't for me. But when she described surrender as the release of the my, for example, it's not my money, and I understood she was describing a releasing of the needing, wanting, grasping, and trying to control. Oh, I saw that her book about money didn't actually have to be about money, and suddenly I was very interested. So back to the original question of surrender indicating weakness. Is it weak to surrender? In this context, not at all. And I felt pretty confident about that answer until I talked to someone who told me she had been surrendering her whole adult life. I thought I knew what she meant, and I thought, probably even said, that's not what I'm referring to. I admit, I could be totally wrong about this, but here's what I thought during that conversation. She's telling me that she's surrendering and has surrendered her whole life. But she isn't. She hasn't. She is still trying to control. She's not surrendering as in accepting that what is. Yes, she's giving in, and yes, she's acquiescing to other people's preferences. So in that sense, yes, she is surrendering to other people, but she is doing that out of fear and threat. She's afraid of what will happen if she doesn't give in to their way. She feels threatened by her imagined future of what she's sure will happen if she doesn't go along with their wishes. So she tries to control other people's reactions, and she tries to control the future by giving in to their demands. So yes, I can see how, in a way, she is living a life of surrender. And it makes me wonder, what if, instead of believing she had control over someone else's reactions, and what if, instead of believing she knew how things would play out if she does or doesn't do something, what if she surrendered to the idea that maybe they will be disappointed or angry if I don't give in, and that is okay. And maybe there will be a negative consequence if I don't go along. And I accept that. So then a whole new set of questions pop up for me as I try to work out this hypothetical situation. Then what should she do? How should she behave? If she doesn't surrender to someone else, what should she surrender to? When should she stand her ground? When should she choose her own preference over someone else's? I still do not know the answer to all of these questions yet. My suspicion is that it has to do with abundance. My go-to method for considering impossible situations is to ask, what if you knew it would all be fine? What would you choose then? In the case of my surrendering friend, what if she had no opinion about what would happen next? What would feel like the most loving and abundant choice to make? If she's noticing that she's making a decision out of scarcity, how could she make that decision from abundance instead? And maybe she would decide to choose her own preference instead of someone else's. Which brings us to preference. Preference kept popping up for me as I was learning. I've heard this phrase preference before with other teachers and not really noticed it, but I did really notice it when Michael Singer consistently referred to dropping his preference in the surrender experiment. That was like his whole point, was just to live not guided by his preference. So what is preference even referring to? Is this the ego, what the mind prefers or thinks it knows better? I've started noticing so much preference in my own thinking now that I'm identifying it this way. My mind frequently has a preference for something that is not reality. Cute, right? Like when I wish this wasn't happening. Okay, that's my preference. Does preference suggest where our expectations come from? Are my expectations due to my preferences? I think so. And when I notice this, I figure out why resistance comes up for me. So if I have a preference for people to show up on time, then that becomes my expectation. For example, that a friend should show up on time when we have plans. Then if she doesn't show up on time, my expectation is not met, and I start to feel resistance. It might sound something like, she should be here by now. She shouldn't keep me waiting. She should be more respectful. If she knew she was going to be late, she should have let me know. See how all these should statements are just not reality. The reality is, she's not here by now. I am waiting. I have a thought that she's not respectful. She did not let me know. I have the option to just accept or surrender to this reality instead of resisting it. Let's practice with one of those examples I just gave. The resisting version is me saying, she should be here by now. The accepting version is, she is not here by now. Even though the difference in those two sentences is so slight, do you hear the huge difference in the energy? When I think, she should be here by now, I might feel irritated. When I think, she's not here by now, I might feel observant. And then we can play it out from there. What do I do when I feel irritated? Probably not a lot of great things. What do I do when I feel observant? I feel much more open and calm. I have the capacity to consider possibilities. I don't really have that capacity when I am irritated. Once I asked a coaching client how she felt about having faith. Even from her facial expression, I could tell there was a disconnect. She said she didn't really identify with that word, faith. I get how using the word faith can be a turnoff for someone whose context is that it means to believe something blindly without evidence. And I probably have had that same disconnected reaction to the word faith in the past too. But now I am really warming up to it. I am really starting to consider the idea of purposely and intentionally believing something even when there is no reason to believe it. I like the idea of noticing what I know, like deep and innately, not what I think. I like the idea of trusting that things will work out and that I am set for life. Because what's the alternative? To trust that things won't work out? That I'm doomed for life? No, thank you. I was explaining all these new to me ideas and concepts to a friend and talking about how because I was learning about and experimenting with surrender, I was trying to be open. She said she didn't get the connection between surrendering and being open. She described it for herself in her own situation as thinking she could either surrender to do this or that. How is that being open? As soon as she described her two choices, I felt even more clear about what I was talking about. That's an example of the mind falsely limiting the choices to just two and thinking that one of them is probably the right choice or maybe the better choice. Being open means I have no idea how many choices there are, and I see my preference as just a preference. It also means I believe all of the choices could be right. So I am being open beyond my own knowledge and my own preferences. How do I surrender? Even though I'm sharing what I'm learning in all of this, it is still relatively new for me. I am a baby at surrendering right now, and I still have so many questions and so much to learn. As I was listening to the surrender experiment for the first time through, I hoped, my preference was, that after he was done telling his story, he would switch into teaching mode and give me a list of steps or maybe a worksheet on how to surrender. I liked hearing his stories and I understood what he was telling me, but I did wonder how I could import the ideas and lessons from the woods of Florida in the 1970s to the suburbs of Arizona here in the 20s. One question that my mind was very eager to learn the answer to before it will relax and stop resisting is, how do I live in surrender? Doesn't that mean I'm just doing nothing? When I pose that question to myself, I come up with the answer of maybe, and wouldn't that be fine? What if I surrendered to a life of just doing nothing and boredom? Because the preference of the mind is entertainment, problem solving, excitement, drama, creation. Interestingly enough, after I decided, I guess it's okay for me to surrender to a life of boredom and doing nothing, I found my next surrender teacher, who I mentioned earlier, Tosha Silver. I devoured her book, Outrageous Openness, another book of stories, which I really enjoyed. And again, I was left with the understanding of how she applied openness to her life in the 90s and early 2000s in the Bay Area. But how could I apply it to my life now in the suburbs of Arizona in the 20s? And that's when I gave her book, It's Not Your Money, another look. That's when I heard it described as a how-to surrender book. What? Exactly what I had been wanting. I'm not saying it always works out that effortlessly and flowy, that one minute I was wishing for a how-to book and then I surrendered to a life of boredom and then I received a how-to book. But that is how it all unfolded for me in the past few weeks. Another question that the mind in me has is, am I just waiting for life to offer me something that I can surrender to? That's the idea I got from listening to the surrender experiment. But as I listened to another one of my favorite teachers, Jess Lively, on her podcast, talking about how her life was flowing, I heard so many beautiful examples of surrendering to the nudges and guidance of the inner voice rather than the mind, and not necessarily an external offer. That was the missing piece for me. Speaking of offer, we all know what the word offer means, right? But as I am learning and getting used to the language of new teachers, I actually had an offer misunderstanding. Just after I listened to Tosha Silver's book, Outrageous Openness, it seemed like the perfect feminine energy complement to the male energy surrender experiment. I heard her being interviewed on that podcast I mentioned. She explained to the interviewer that the entire book, It's Not Your Money, is really about offering. Without having read the book yet, I interpreted offering in the context of generosity. It sounded good to me. That night, I was talking with my sister, and I summarized some of what I had heard and what I was thinking, and she asked me, "What's your offering?" I knew right away. It's coaching. It's the idea that I have this skill and this talent that I'm good at and that I enjoy and that I really believe makes this world a better place. So I'm able to offer coaching. And in thinking about this, I considered, I guess it means I can offer coaching without any expectation, no strings attached. I can coach even if I don't get paid for coaching. This is an interesting perspective. It kind of made me wonder, does surrendering and following these teachings mean that I volunteer my coaching freely and that my life will take on a monk-like existence? Again, with the intention of surrender, I was able to answer, maybe. but I'll be honest, the mind in me was screaming, no! And I could definitely feel so much resistance. As it turns out, I had misunderstood what Tosha was referring to when she talked about offering. She wasn't talking about a gift or a contribution. She wasn't talking about what I list on my services page of my website, my offerings. She was suggesting that part of surrender means offering any problem, any burden or desire to the divine to handle instead of thinking the mind has to solve it. What a relief. That was an interesting little mental field trip I took there. And also, thinking about offering in this way is literally a relief. It means when I catch myself stressing or feeling worried or anxious, I can offer whatever it is that's bothering me up and detach myself from fixing or controlling it. I can trust that I will know the next right step to take towards or away from it. Can you hear how this exploration has ignited my curiosity and interest and even my passion? I definitely feel it. And even though I was prepared to surrender to boredom and doing nothing in order to practice this work, I'm actually feeling very excited and inspired. And what I'm learning is causing me to do lots of things, not do nothing. I still want more information, more content, more understanding, and I see how valuable it's been to discuss these concepts with other people, to hear their perspectives and their questions and understandings. So I have started a surrender study group. For the months of March and April, we will be working through Tosha Silver's It's Not Your Money book a week at a time. If the topics that I've shared with you today are interesting to you, and if you're curious about the book, please consider joining us. We will be meeting on Wednesday nights on Zoom, and we also have a Facebook group with about 70 people so far from all around the world who are interested in the book and these concepts. I'm so excited to see how this all unfolds, and I'm open to how it all unfolds. If you are listening to this in real time at the end of February 2021, you can join us in the Facebook group by going to facebook.com/groups/surrender-study. If you want the links to the books and the podcast episodes that I've mentioned today, just go to bexb.org/surrender. And while you are there, you can also leave me a comment letting me know what you think about all of this. And if you're on my email list, meaning you are one of my favorite people, I have sent you the links in your email along with today's episode. Plus, I sent you a personalized invitation to the Facebook group that I just mentioned in case you are leaning towards joining us. Make sure you check your spam and junk folders so that you can find the email. If you're not on my email list yet, why not join? Just go to bexb.org/favorites and become one of my favorite people. You will get an email each week along with the episode. Plus, I share all of my offerings, the other kind of offering, with my list. Thank you so much for listening today. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye. This has been Release Your Resistance. Thank you for listening. If you like this podcast, make sure you're subscribed and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Also, think about someone who you know who would love this episode and share it with them. There should be a share button on your app if you're listening to this on your phone. If you'd like to continue this conversation one-on-one or in real time, come visit me on my site at bexb.org to see how we can work together.